Best thing now, John, is to hand over to you, and maybe you just introduce yourself a bit in a bit more of a more detailed view from what I just said, and then get started. And you have 20 minutes. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Steve. So hi everyone, my name is John Glen. I'm the co-founder and the product manager at Spartan Solutions. We're a software company based in Glasgow. I was a computer science graduate from Glasgow University back in the day, and one of my roles at the moment is the product manager of Profis, which is our predictive analytics solution. This was a solution which is part of our asset performance management software suite, and we designed it in collaboration with Steve and the team from OGTC, as well as Repsol Sinopec, one of the big operators in the North Sea. But my general experience has been designing and delivering solutions to large industrial companies to help them digitize operations. So companies like Agreco, Aker Solutions, Atlas Copco, Balfour Beatty, Enermec, Wood Group, Spirit Aerosystems, to name a few. So typically large industrial companies looking to automate some or all of their operations. Today's talk is about operational resilience and how the pandemic has exposed the fragility and how most industrial companies manage their assets and their supply chains. I'm going to share some analysis from companies like McKinsey and the Financial Times on who the winners and losers are so far, and talk about some of the big changes that we think are needed to become more resilient, and hopefully provide some hope backed by evidence about how asset-centric industries like oil and gas can become more resilient quickly. So we talk a lot about resilience, so I thought the first thing I really should do today is define what I mean by resilience. And I'm going to borrow a definition from the consultants McKinsey. And I think having that operational flexibility to react to sudden and rapid change has maybe been the biggest challenge energy companies have faced, maybe in the last 50 years. There's been a lot of ups and downs, and having the flexibility to adapt is really important. But today's focus is on what resilience means to asset-centric companies, so companies in the oil and gas sector, and how digital innovation will make you more resilient. Now, the definition talks about profit through structural change, and the pandemic has been the biggest structural change to the global economy, certainly in my lifetime, and it's forced us all to reevaluate our working lives. And I'll use that terrible phrase, the new normal. But the new normal has got three defining characteristics that I see. The first thing is no paperwork. The digital tools are now replacing all forms of paperwork. Paper processing forces people to travel and intermingle. Paper is also very inefficient and does not work well when physical offices are undermanned or unavailable. And that's the next big change, is no offices. Physical distancing, fear of contagion has removed the desire to squeeze into centralised office space. There'll still be a place for offices, of course, but I think their usage will change dramatically. And efficient collaboration at distance is now essential to operational resilience. And that takes me on to the third big change, which is no barriers. So we expect technology and the technology that supports the new normal to just work. There really can be no barriers to digital collaboration anymore. And I would say that by and large, the first wave of general purpose tools that we use for the new normal is working. So Teams and Zoom have kept us connected. Office 365 has kept us productive. Financial tools like Xero, DocuSign, Square, all these companies and many more have kept the money flowing. I also think it's interesting to note that all of this new normal technology that I've mentioned is cloud-based. And many of these tools are introducing artificial intelligence to support everyday work, which I'll come back to later. But I would also argue from a technology point of view that we've reached the limits of the current approach to how we manage oil and gas operations. So many operators are using outdated technology and paper processes to plan and execute the operation of plant and equipment. And the cost base across the basin is still rising at 3% per annum. And that's despite Herculean efforts over the last 5-10 years to reduce operations and maintenance costs. And I guess the worst statistic is that equipment reliability is rapidly degrading year in year at 14% the last time it was looked at. And this pattern is reducing resilience and eroding profitability in the North Sea at the moment. So moving on to the companies that are doing well, which companies are currently demonstrating resilience in this early stage of the pandemic? And the Financial Times very recently published the top 100 companies that have prospered so far, and here are the results in infographic form. And the first thing to say is that information technology giants like Apple and Microsoft, and the agile online retailers like Amazon, these companies are clear winners. There's a second wave of communications, media, and advertising companies like Facebook and Google that are also doing very well. And not surprisingly, there's a third wave of healthcare companies that are doing very well. But it is worth noting that there are no energy or industrial companies in the top 100 at this stage in the pandemic. But that being said, there are industrial companies that are building and maintaining physical assets and equipment that are demonstrating strong resilience. The first one is Lockheed Martin. So Lockheed have reinvented their maintenance and support operations for the new F-35 fighter jet, and they're using a combination of specialist mobile apps and advanced data analytics to streamline that whole product line. Another example is Sandvik. Sandvik manufacture and service tools for the mining industry, and Sandvik have pioneered digital innovation in that sector for many years, and they're currently using equipment sensors, predictive analytics, and mobile apps to increase the equipment uptime that they give to their customers and drive down the maintenance and support costs of the equipment. And it's interesting to note that both companies, the stock price of both companies is higher today than it was at this time last year, and they are both demonstrating true resilience. So what attributes the companies like Lockheed and Sandvik share? What is the common thread between them? And when we analyse companies like those two, we think there's 5 things that spring out. And the first thing is that there's no paper. So resilient companies are reducing or removing paper and manual processes as fast as they can from their operations. And I guess on a personal level, I haven't printed a piece of paper for business or personal use for the best part of 6 months, and I can't see that changing. But if you look at the amount of paperwork currently used for an offshore maintenance work pack, as one example, there are big opportunities for oil and gas companies to streamline work flowing through the North Sea supply chain and remove as much or all of that paper wherever possible. The second thing that you see is the growing use of artificial intelligence. So everything from expert rule systems to complex black box neural networks. There's a lot of AI being deployed at the moment to support knowledge workers and everyday tasks. Now, I've noticed this actually in the Office 365 product, where features such as auto design of PowerPoint slides, which was recently introduced, these features are saving me hours and hours of work per presentation. So I'm beginning to see it in Office products. Another thing to say is that managing lots of data can be overwhelming at times, and the industrial companies that do this really well are putting the end user first and not the data scientists first. They're putting the end user. So if you're an offshore maintenance expert and you're faced with the decision to shut down a gas compression system, you need this, tools, decision support tools that are easy to use and understand under pressure. And once you make a decision to intervene, especially if it's mission critical plan, there has to be a seamless process to collaborate with other members of your team and to take action. So having this insight, this data analytics without actually taking action is useless. So it's important that we have action at the end of all this insight. And finally, the technology must be available to anyone in the organization at any time, and the data it uses must be real time. So I've already said the new normal assumes seamless access to information in the cloud and tools that allow decision makers to collaborate using the latest data 24/7 by 365. And I see too many users in the oil and gas industry struggling with old applications. You know, they need VPN access, or they chew up excess bandwidth. They've got horrible green screen interfaces, and you know, you're waiting for the data to be refreshed by the IT guy at 12 o'clock every night. So that type of approach is not going to work going forward. Another thing I would argue is it's not just the technology we need to refresh, we need to rethink how we think about operations and maintenance in the North Sea. And I get this is information research from both companies like McKinsey and from conversations with operators. So the first thing I think we need to do is stop doing, stop doing what we've always done, and start at ground zero again. Rebuild work plans based on business value, and organise these new work plans into focused campaigns. I think we also need to move away from scheduled maintenance that's based on fixed time intervals, and start to take account of changing equipment conditions. And that means real-time analytics and predictive models. And this is what Lockheed are doing in aerospace, and Sandvik are doing for industrial equipment. And then we need to adopt real-time monitoring and decision making. It's too slow and it's too expensive to batch up asset data, recombine it in offline models, and then ask your equipment experts and your data scientists to pore over it looking for anomalies. We need efficient real-time analysis that automatically highlights anomalies so that equipment experts can focus in on potential issues and trigger interventions efficiently. And we need to simplify and automate the workflows. There's too many decision points, too much manual processing. So we need to automate this and reduce the time and effort to make decisions to be as quickly as possible. And then present information as clearly as possible to the people that need to make those decisions. And those decisions, I think, going forward will be taken more centrally wherever possible. I think it's fair to say that shared centralized service centres that can support offshore activities are more efficient. But this model works best, and it can only really work when there's true real-time collaboration between the onshore service centres and the offshore workforce. And it only really works when they can work together as a team to identify and resolve issues as they emerge. And obviously you need the right systems to support this new way of thinking. You can't make this leap using expensive on-premise technology that was designed for the old way of thinking. We need affordable, agile apps that can run in the cloud and reduce the barriers to working and promote this real-time collaboration. So that's what we think we need to do as an industry. And we call that kind of new way of thinking asset performance management. So this is a term that we use. And asset performance management uses mobile apps and sensors to capture data from offshore plant and equipment. And then this operations data is blended with other information, such as production loss records and maintenance work orders. And this data becomes a digital twin of each mission critical piece of plant and equipment. They can then use this twin to visualize the current and historical performance of plant and equipment. And then we can deploy expert rules and machine learning systems to the twin to predict failure and to alert experts to emerging fault modes. And this is what we mean by asset performance management. And we completed a pilot of it with Repsol Sinopec just before the lockdown. And the pilot demonstrated that the digital tools available, they're not only user-friendly, but they add instant value to an oil and gas operator. So for example, we demonstrated the ability to predict and prevent downtime in gas compression systems. And this will significantly increase production recovery rates when it's rolled out across platforms. And we also benchmarked the difference between executing work and data capture on paper versus mobile apps. And we proved that technicians can recover hours of productive time per shift if they capture data at source and remove the time it takes to queue for the PCs and rekey work order results into Maximo and transfer operator rounds data into Pi. There's lots of small, significant benefits you can get from removing a lot of this manual data capture and re-entry. So that's an example from the oil and gas industry, but we also recently won an innovation award for digitizing the operations of Ramirent. Ramirent are a rental company specializing in construction plant and equipment for the Nordics and the Eastern Europe. So Ramirent have now replaced all paperwork with mobile apps, and this has transformed the performance of their operation. So, for example, they've halved the time it takes to turn around equipment, and they've totally streamlined the process of capturing and resolving damage to equipment. And we're now working on predictive analytics with Ramirent to increase the equipment uptime and to streamline operational processes. So, for example, they want to auto-receipt equipment into a depot using GPS data from the sensors on the equipment. And these are the types of process improvements you can also get when you embrace this type of data capture. So we know what it takes to build resilience in industrial operations. And if you feel a need to get moving on this, then you're in good company. So again, McKinsey recently surveyed 60 companies, and the majority of them struggled with old and inefficient IT solutions during the lockdown. And they almost all planned to increase resilience and use tools like mobile apps and predictive analytics to help them on this journey. So that concludes the presentation. Thank you very much for your time, and I'll hand back to Steve for any questions.
Thank you, John. Really, I think, pertinent and timely presentation for the industry as we begin to come out of COVID. Hopefully we're coming out. There's been a bit of an uptick. And I think, just to mention that the project with Repsol that was supported by the OGTC, there is, John mentioned it was finished just as we were going in. There will be a closeout report on our website very shortly related to that project. For those who are interested in learning more. So we do have something in the chat. So I remind you again, if you want to raise your hand and come in and ask your question verbally, that's fine. But also if you want to ask the question through the chat. So John, Donald Brown talks about and makes a comment here. John, I support and do not dispute anything you presented. However, the barriers are real and prevent the revolution from occurring as follows. Business cases, achieving the results, so a pilot might demonstrate something about how do you really get the value, and implementing an agile way of working into non-technical companies. So I think, so that would be my question as well. We know that there is a cultural, behavioral challenge, and the recent maturity survey that's going to be released next week shows that while we've got a lot of this technology in pilot mode, the industry really hasn't gone beyond that. So I think that's sort of an additional aspect to that. So what's your input for those areas?
I think it's a very good point, and I think the industry has struggled historically with embracing innovation at speed. I guess I would say a few things to that. One is the business cases. I think the business cases are there. I think they've yet to be proven. I think the pilot studies demonstrate significant return on investment to using tools such as predictive maintenance to reduce downtime. I think when we started our project together, Steve, there was something like $6 billion was the unrecovered every year unrecovered from the North Sea. So I think if we can recover 1, 2, 3, 5% of that, it's a massive amount of money that can help support the cash flow of an oil and gas operator. So I think the business case is there, but I agree it's yet to be proven. So I think to me the shift now moves to how do you turn a pilot into a production trial, into a production rollout, into an exemplar case study. And as a technology provider, I can't actually help the industry too much with that. I can support the industry, but I think the industry needs to take a leadership role and just take the plunge. And I think obviously COVID has forced us to plunge into many new ways of working. So I think we actually probably need to build on the momentum of doing things differently and turn these pilots into trials, into production rollouts, and then into actual case studies as quickly as we can. The only way we can convince the industry it's going to work is to show it working, and I think we just need to embrace that. But the other point that Donald made, I think, was the word agile. I think we do need to work in an agile way. I think we should be looking at projects that last 6, 12 weeks and then have measurable results against expected results. And we can move in 6, 10, 12-week chunks and start to break this journey up into measurable milestones that board level executives can actually measure and checkpoint that we're actually getting where we said we were going to go. I think that agile approach, coupled with more leadership support from the operators, is what's needed to start to break through some of the cultural barriers which undoubtedly exist. But we have an opportunity, I think, to rethink how we work, and I think we should embrace it now.
Yeah, okay, John. I think, so just a reminder to everyone, please put your questions into the chat or raise your hand. I see we have one. Willy has raised his hand, so I'm going to unmute you, Willy.
Hi, John, can you hear me?
Hi, Willy. Yes, I can hear you.
Good to talk to you again. Willy Reid from the University of Strathclyde. John and I have known each other for the last number of years and talked through a number of projects. But excellent presentation. I really liked the way you presented that with the theory and the practice and the ongoing thought process of how we adapt to COVID. But my two questions are as follows. How much did you learn in terms of your process with Repsol and others from other industries? Because, in my last 3 or 4 years, when I've looked at the various interactions in terms of technology, whether it's in digital and other areas, that the surprising thing I found was that there was so much learning from other sectors which could be embraced by oil and gas. And I get the impression that you've done that. And then my second question relates to energy integration and going forward into offshore wind and these sort of areas. And clearly there's fantastic opportunity there to take that forward. So those are my two questions, and hopefully you can have a think on the response.
Yeah, no, thanks, Willy. And actually, I'd like to also take this moment to thank Strathclyde University, because they were a key partner in the Repsol pilot, and I think it's fair to say that Scotland's got some world-class universities in Aberdeen, Edinburgh and Glasgow that industry can be using to help us in this journey, and we've used Strathclyde tremendously, their EEE department, to help us with the deep machine learning aspects of the project. So a big thanks to Willy and his team for the support. To answer the question, Willy, I think let's use Ramirent as an example. So Ramirent are a 3,000 person company based out in Finland and Sweden. And when we put the project together, the project team had a board sponsor and it had operational leadership and IT support. So the core team at Ramirent was probably 4 or 5 people, and we had probably 4 or 5 people from our company as well. So we created this virtual team that were empowered to do the project. We completed V1 of the project in about 3 months, and then we took learnings from it, and then another 3 months later we had a version that was ready for rollout, and then we managed the rollout of the technology over the space of 12 months using a tried and tested deployment model. I think that what companies like Ramirent have shown is if you take a pragmatic, down-to-earth, focused approach to delivering IT projects, and you don't overcomplicate them. They don't have to be expensive multi-year projects. They can actually be cost-effective, agile, quick-win projects to build confidence and to learn lessons and to build momentum. I think the oil and gas industry could take a lot from that approach about how you move from an idea to a pilot to a production rollout. I think there's some good patterns that we've seen in other industries that oil and gas could take advantage of. I think that's the first thing I would say. And the second thing about the use of the technology, what we learned from the Repsol Sinopec pilot is that any organization that has time series data from sensors, fault records, and subject matter experts can use predictive analytics to reduce unexpected failure and improve uptime. So if you're running an offshore wind turbine, it will have telematics coming from various aspects of it. It will have fault records, and it will have onshore subject matter experts who can help you. So the pattern that we saw at Repsol Sinopec will work for pretty much any industrial industry that meets those criteria. So I think the reusability of the technology is very high, and it can be used for renewables. I think it can be used for power distribution, nuclear. So I think that this approach is not just specific to oil and gas operators, which is encouraging as well. And I think that will help the technology be adopted quicker as well. So hopefully that answers your questions, Willy.
Great, thanks, John. We have another question from Arena. You mentioned going paperless as part of your recommendations or what you're seeing from the most resilient companies. So are there any tips or tools that you can suggest to help move from paper to digital? I know there's an element of enforcement over the last 6 months, but you know, there's still a challenge. And I have printed off a couple of documents because I have to sign them and then scan them and then back. So how do we get away from some of those sort of workflows?
Well, I think in terms of signatures, etc., is it DocuSign, for example? I've probably signed about 7 DocuSign documents in the last 6 months. So there are platforms out there that are tried and tested and well proven for dealing with the kind of legal and compliance side of the paperwork. But if you take it to an oil and gas specific use case, so for example, we did some work with a large service provider on digitizing work packs for construction and maintenance work offshore. And a work pack can quite often span 1 or 2 very large lever arch folders, the big lever arch folders. And when the team go offshore, they put them under their feet. You know, they can use them as footrests. There's that much paperwork. That's a lot of paper. And it's quite complex paperwork as well. It's P&ID diagrams and all sorts of compliance and operating processes and instructions, etc. So it's a non-trivial challenge for oil and gas because there's a lot of information that you need often to execute offshore work. But that being said, we used a large form factor tablet to replace that lever arch folder, and we used ATEX compliant devices. Obviously explosions are a bigger risk, and you want to make sure it's all ATEX compliant. But if you get the right ATEX compliant device with a large enough form factor, reasonable connectivity, there's no reason why you can't take a lever arch folder worth of information and compress it into a work pack that's sent electronically in a few microseconds, and everything you do offshore, red line markup of diagrams, capturing of tasks, risk assessments, all of the common working tasks that have been executed offshore have been proven to be you can digitize every one of them. I haven't seen a work order or a piece of paper that couldn't be digitized in the North Sea. It can be done, but it just takes a lot of effort to do it because there's so much paper that is currently being used. But rest assured, it can be done.
Okay, so just a reminder, any more questions, please raise your hand or put it into the chat. Just going back to that question, John, on on the move from paper. So one way of doing it is to actually challenge your processes and challenge whether you actually need the paper in the first place. Obviously, there's a lot of information that's needed to support work or processes, but you know, is that something we should be looking at? You talked about automation as well, and user-friendly workflows. So is it? I guess these things are not looked in isolation; they're looked in as a sort of whole. Is that your experience or your recommendation?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think when we approach a project, we look at the as-is process, and then we model the should-be process. The worst thing you can do is take the as-is process and make it digital, because you're taking all of the crap that's in the as-is process and just making it more efficient crap. What you need to do is take a big step back and say, okay, where's the value add in the process? What should the best process be? If we had the best technician, the most efficient person that we have offshore executing this process, what would that flow look like? What data should we present? How do we make it as simple as possible, following the Apple mantra just remove everything. Just what is the core process, and that's what you're trying to achieve. You're trying to really distill the cleanest, simplest process that meets 80-90% of what needs to be done, and you're designing that process, not the as-is process. So when you engage at the early stage of a paper to digital process, it's important to understand the as-is so you don't miss anything, but then you have to start with a clean way of thinking and think, okay, what is the should-be process? And it's the same thing that I know a lot of operators are doing at the moment with their maintenance plans. They're not taking the 5-year maintenance plan that they used to do. They're actually putting that in the virtual bin and starting again, saying, if we were to maintain this piece of equipment, how would we do it today? What is the real value add? And it's a similar methodology you take when you're designing an electronic version of a paper process. So absolutely, you have to go through some key steps. So they're not difficult, they don't take a massive amount of time, but you have to make sure that you don't reproduce the problems of the old system and the new system.
Okay, and I guess it goes a little bit back to Donald's original, early question around the agile. So in other words, you're looking at a process, you're doing that as a team, and you're either using sprint methodologies or agile or whatever. Do you find that most companies are beginning to become receptive to that way of working? Is that typically how you work with some of your clients, or do you still see that as a bit of a cultural barrier that needs to be overcome when you're engaging with some of your clients?
I think it's changed a lot in 5 years, Steve. I think we only do agile projects. Sometimes you have to dress it up for for senior management to make it look a little bit more like a waterfall project, but actually within the project you're doing agile to get to various checkpoints in the process. But any digital project that involves user engagement, change management, etc., you really should do it in an agile way, because it's got so many more advantages than doing it in the old-fashioned waterfall way, where you build the spec and you come back 6 months, a year later and show someone something, and it's just not what they were expecting. You have to be weekly show and tells and constant engagement with the stakeholders. And I find that it's changed a lot in the last 5 years. I would say probably 80-90% of the companies we work with are very comfortable with it, and the other 10% we kind of work with them and work around it a little bit to get the best of both worlds. But I think Agile is now a fairly well established way of working in most industries, and I would hope it's not a barrier in the oil and gas industry. But that would be interesting to find out what the audience thinks about that. Yeah,
I mean, I think it's still, again, it's almost like this is my own perception, but it's still a little bit, it's been tried and piloted, but it's not necessarily, in most companies, necessarily the norm yet, I think, when you look at rolling out technology.
I would add, though, I think if you're doing an ERP implementation or even an ERP upgrade, they tend to be more waterfall, more monolithic style projects, and it maybe they lend themselves to that more. I'm not sure, but maybe they do. But I can tell you that if you're implementing a mobility solution or a predictive maintenance solution, there is no need to have that 12-18 month project plan. You should be looking to deliver business value within 12 weeks. And in 12 weeks, there's not much point having a waterfall plan in a 12-week time window, because it's just not big enough. So I think it's also a change of mindset, and I would hope that is good news. If you're a stakeholder and a large operator, and you're wanting to invest money in a solution to get a return on investment, I think it's better to know after 12 weeks if you're on track to get that than having to wait a year or 2 years. So I hope that with the right, incentives and communication to the senior team, that actually Agile can become more useful to them and more understandable. But again, that's a hope, and not I haven't got any real evidence to back that up.
No. Okay, thanks, John. Well, thank you. I think we've reached the end of our time now. So just want to thank everyone for turning up. I hope you found that very useful. And please check on the OGTC website for upcoming Tech20 talks. And I'd just like to remind you, we will post the results of the elements of this presentation upon, not the presentation itself, but the subject matter up on LinkedIn. And if you have any further questions for John, then please go there and ask the questions, and either OGTC and or John will answer your questions. And in the next few weeks, this will be put up on live on our website, and you could be able to re-watch John if you wanted to be reminded of some of his words of wisdom in a couple of weeks. So just thanks very much. There's one comment from Rob, I think, just coming in. Is there a major gap between what company leadership want to do with digital projects and strategy versus middle management and business? I think that comes back to some of the things we discussed around the value of the business case and everything else. Unfortunately, Rob, we haven't got enough time to answer that question or discuss it, but I think it's a very good question, and perhaps we can put it onto LinkedIn and maybe have a virtual conversation there. We'd just like to thank everyone for turning up again. Thank you very much to John, and have a good day, everyone.
Thanks, Steve.